It's a story that defies everything we think we know about human nature and the sea's capacity for both devastation and redemption. What two complete strangers discovered inside the rotting hull of a forgotten sailboat would not only change their lives forever, but challenge our understanding of maritime history itself. The Coast Guard called it impossible. Marine archaeologists labeled it a hoax. Yet the evidence sits locked in a bank vault in Miami, waiting for someone brave enough to tell the truth about what really happened to the Esperanza del Mar and the mysterious water-tread box that should never have existed. In this story, we're going to dive deep into the impossible details of a discovery that marine experts said couldn't be real, analyze the forensic evidence that proves it was, and reveal how a piece of 18th century technology saved two modern lives in ways that science still can't fully explain. This is a lesson that every sailor, every dreamer, and every person who believes in the impossible needs to hear, because what happened to Jake Morrison and Elena Vasquez could happen to anyone who dares to look beyond the surface of what we think we know about the ocean's secrets. Jake Morrison was the kind of man who fixed things for a living and fixed people for free. At 42, this former Navy engineer had spent the last 15 years running a small marine repair shop in Key Largo, his weathered hands as comfortable with a wrench as they were gentle with the stray cats that wandered into his workshop. Standing 6'2", with prematurely grey hair and eyes the colour of storm clouds, Jake had the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen the worst the ocean could offer and lived to tell about it. His friends knew him as the guy who'd drop everything to help a stranded boater, the man who kept his shop open late when hurricane season threatened, the mechanic who never charged a widow full price for repairs to her late husband's fishing boat. Elena Vasquez was Jake's complete opposite in almost every way that mattered, which perhaps explains why fate chose to bind their stories together. A 38-year-old marine biologist with a PhD from Woods Hole, she possessed the kind of brilliant, analytical mind that could dissect the complex ecosystems of coral reefs, but struggled with the simple mechanics of human conversation. Her colleagues at the University of Miami respected her groundbreaking research on deep-sea symbiosis, but few knew about her secret passion for maritime archaeology or the collection of antique nautical instruments that filled her small apartment in Coconut Grove. Elena was the kind of person who preferred the company of octopi to most humans, who could speak fluent Spanish, Portuguese and Latin, but stumbled over small talk at faculty parties. Their paths crossed on a sweltering Tuesday morning in August 2019 at the Coconut Grove Marine Salvage Auction, where the dreams of failed sailors go to die. Jake was there looking for spare parts for his shop, his practiced eye scanning the usual collection of corroded engines and sun-bleached sails. Elena had come reluctantly, dragged by a colleague who insisted she needed to get out more and thought a maritime auction might interest her scientific mind. Neither of them was looking for a 34-foot Morgan sailboat that looked like it had been chewed up by a hurricane and spit out onto the auction block. The Esperanza del Mar, Spanish for Hope of the Sea, was lot number 47, and it was a disaster wrapped in fiberglass and false promises. Built in 1978, she'd been beautiful once, but decades of neglect and at least 3 hurricanes had reduced her to what the auctioneer generously called a restoration project for the enthusiastic sailor. Her hull was sound enough, but everything else told the story of abandonment. Torn sails, corroded rigging, a cabin that smelled of mildew and broken dreams. The previous owner had died intestate, and the boat had sat in a Miami marina for 4 years, accumulating liens and deterioration in equal measure. Jake found himself standing next to Elena as the bidding began, both of them watching with the morbid fascination of people who understood exactly how much work the boat would need. The auctioneer started at $15,000, and the price dropped quickly as the crowd of experienced sailors recognized a money pit when they saw one. At $8,000, Jake surprised himself by raising his hand. At $7,000, Elena shocked herself by bidding against him. At $6,000, they were the only 2 people left in the bidding war, each driven by something they couldn't quite explain. "You know she's going to cost 3 times the purchase price to make seaworthy," Jake muttered to Elena between bids. "I know," Elena replied, raising her paddle again. "But look at those lines. She was built when they still cared about how a boat moved through the water." Jake studied the woman beside him. Designer clothes that couldn't hide her obvious discomfort in crowds, hands that spoke of laboratory work rather than physical labor, but eyes that saw the same potential in the broken sailboat that he did. When the hammer fell at $5,800 in Elena's favor, Jake did something that surprised them both. "You're going to need help," he said simply. "I've got a shop, tools, experience. You've got the boat, and what I'm guessing is more book learning about sailing than I'll ever have. Want to go partners?" Elena looked at this stranger who just offered to share in her impulse purchase, her analytical mind cataloging all the reasons this was a terrible idea, while her heart recognized something she'd rarely encountered: genuine kindness without expectation of reward. "I don't know anything about boat restoration," she admitted. "I study marine life, not marine vehicles." "I don't know anything about marine biology," Jake replied with a grin. "But I'm pretty sure neither of us knows what we're really getting into." They shook hands right there beside the Esperanza del Mar, two strangers bound together by a shared moment of beautiful foolishness. Elena wrote the check. Jake arranged for transport to his shop, and both of them began the kind of partnership that only makes sense in retrospect, when you understand how perfectly their different skills would complement each other in the ordeal to come. The first 3 months of restoration work proceeded exactly as anyone who knew boats would have predicted: slowly, expensively, and with a constant parade of unpleasant surprises. Jake's marine repair shop became their evening and weekend headquarters, where Elena learned the difference between a winch and a windlass, while Jake discovered that his new partner's scientific approach to problem solving was actually incredibly valuable when trying to diagnose complex mechanical issues. They worked well together, their different personalities creating a natural balance. Jake's hands-on experience and intuitive understanding of how boats behaved in water complemented Elena's methodical research approach and attention to detail. When they encountered a problem, Jake would feel his way to a solution, while Elena would research the proper technique, and together they usually found an approach that was both practical and theoretically sound. The hull required extensive fiberglass work to repair stress cracks and osmotic blisters. The engine, a Westerbeck diesel that hadn't run in years, needed a complete rebuild. The electrical system was a maze of corroded connections and improvised repairs that took Jake weeks to untangle and rewire properly. Elena threw herself into researching every aspect of the restoration, reading everything from classic boat-building texts to modern marine engineering journals, her scientific background helping her understand the complex interplay of forces that make a sailboat work. By November, they'd made enough progress that the Esperanza del Mar actually looked like a boat again, rather than a derelict project. The hull gleamed with fresh paint, new rigging stretched taut between refurbished masts, and the diesel engine purr with the satisfaction of proper maintenance. Elena had proven surprisingly adept at sailmaking, her precise mind well suited to the geometric complexities of cutting and sewing Dacron cloth. Jake had mastered the art of working around Elena's methodical pace, learning to appreciate how her careful approach prevented the kind of costly mistakes that plague rushed restoration projects. They'd also become genuine friends, their initial partnership evolving into the kind of easy companionship that develops between people who've shared both frustrating setbacks and small victories. Jake discovered that Elena's social awkwardness masked a wickedly dry sense of humor and a genuine warmth that emerged once she felt comfortable with someone. Elena learned that Jake's blue-collar exterior concealed a sharp intelligence and an unexpectedly poetic appreciation for the beauty of well-designed mechanical systems. As winter approached, they began planning their first real sailing trip. Nothing ambitious, just a weekend cruise to the dry Tortugas to test their restored boat in open water. Elena had completed her navigation certification, while Jake had taught her enough about sail handling and seamanship that she could crew competently in moderate conditions. They were both nervous and excited about finally taking the Esperanza del Mar beyond the protected waters of Biscayne Bay. But first, they had to address the one remaining restoration challenge they'd been avoiding: the forward cabin storage areas that Jake had sealed off during the early stages of hull repair. The previous owner had clearly used these spaces as a dumping ground for everything he couldn't bring himself to throw away. Boxes of moldy charts, broken equipment, personal belongings that told the sad story of sailing dreams abandoned. Jake and Elena had agreed to tackle this final cleanup before their maiden voyage, turning it into a kind of celebratory ritual that would officially mark the end of the restoration phase. On a cool Saturday morning in December, they armed themselves with garbage bags, dust masks, and rubber gloves for what they expected to be an unpleasant but straightforward cleanup job. The forward cabin spaces were cramped even by sailboat standards, accessible only through small hatches that required crawling on hands and knees. The air inside was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, and their flashlights revealed the accumulated detritus of years of neglect. Most of what they found met their expectations. Boxes of charts so water-damaged they crumbled at a touch, corroded tools that couldn't be salvaged, clothing and personal items that were beyond saving. Elena systematically documented anything that might have historical value, while Jake focused on determining what could be recycled or required special disposal. They worked steadily through the morning, filling bag after bag with debris, slowly revealing spaces that hadn't seen proper light in years. It was Elena who noticed the irregularity first, her scientist's eye trained to spot things that didn't belong. Along the starboard hull, hidden behind a stack of collapsed cardboard boxes, the fiberglass didn't look quite right. Where everything else showed the smooth, consistent finish of factory construction, this section had a subtly different texture, as if it had been repaired or modified. "Jake," she called, her voice muffled by the dust mask and the cramped space. "Can you look at this? Something's not right with the hull here." Jake squeezed through the narrow opening to join her, his larger frame making the tight space even more claustrophobic. Elena directed her flashlight at the suspicious area, and Jake's experienced hands immediately confirmed what her eyes had detected. Someone had cut into the original hull and sealed it back up, but not with the same materials or techniques used in the original construction. "That's definitely a modification," Jake said, running his fingers along the edges where old and new fiberglass met. "Pretty professional work, but it's not original. Question is, what's behind it?" Elena's scientific curiosity was fully engaged now. Could it be a repair from an accident? Maybe the boat hit something and this is where they patched it. Jake shook his head. Wrong location for that kind of damage. And the shape's all wrong. This was deliberate. Someone cut a hole here and then sealed it up. The question is why? They spent the next hour carefully examining the modification, measuring it, photographing it from every angle, debating what it might contain. The sealed area was roughly rectangular, about 2 feet wide by 3 feet long, located in a part of the hull where no boat system would normally be installed. Elena's methodical mind catalogued all the possibilities: hidden storage for valuables, smuggling compartment, secret repair to hide structural damage. Jake's practical experience suggested it was probably something mundane. Maybe the previous owner had hidden Christmas presents or important documents. But as they discussed their options, both of them felt the same nagging curiosity that had led them to bid on a broken sailboat in the first place. Whatever was behind that modified hull section had been important enough for someone to go to considerable trouble to hide and protect it. The professional quality of the work suggested it wasn't a casual modification, but something done with serious intent. "We have to open it," Elena said finally, voicing what they were both thinking. "I know we're probably going to find moldy papers or corroded electronics, but we'll never be satisfied if we don't look." Jake nodded, already mentally inventorying the tools they'd need. "We'll have to be careful. If we damage the hull integrity, we could create a real problem. Let me get the oscillating saw and some fine grit cutting discs. We'll take it slow." Opening the sealed compartment took most of the afternoon. Jake cut carefully along the edges where new fiberglass met old, stopping frequently to check their progress and ensure they weren't damaging anything structural. Elena documented every step, her scientific training demanding a complete record of their investigation. As the afternoon wore on and the sealed section slowly separated from the surrounding hull, their anticipation grew alongside their nervousness about what they might find. When the modified section finally came free, revealing the hidden compartment behind it, their flashlights illuminated something neither of them had expected. Instead of moldy documents or forgotten valuables, they found themselves looking at a carefully crafted wooden box, about 18 inches square and 8 inches deep, wedged securely into the space between hull and bulkhead. The wood was dark with age, but appeared to be in remarkably good condition, protected by the sealed environment that had preserved it for however long it had been hidden. Jake carefully extracted the box, surprised by its weight and the quality of its construction. The wood appeared to be mahogany, joined with traditional dovetail corners and fitted with brass hardware that had developed a deep patina, but showed no signs of corrosion. Most intriguingly, the box was sealed with what appeared to be a thick coating of pitch or tar, applied so thoroughly that no moisture could have penetrated its contents. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she examined the box, her scientific excitement barely contained. Jake, look at the construction techniques. These joints, this hardware, this isn't modern work. This box is old, really old. Jake turned the box in his hands, studying the craftsmanship with an appreciation born of years working with his hands. The wood's completely sound, no rot at all. Whatever's inside has been perfectly preserved, but why would someone go to all this trouble to hide an old wooden box? They carried the box back to Jake's workshop, where better lighting revealed additional details that increased their excitement. Burned into one corner of the lid was a date, 1742. Below that, in script so faded it was barely legible, were the words Esperanza del Mar, the same name as their boat, but written in a style that belonged to an earlier century. Elena's scientific training warred with her growing excitement. The rational part of her mind insisted this was probably an elaborate hoax, a fake antique planted by someone with a sense of humor and too much time. But the evidence of her senses suggested otherwise. The patina on the brass hardware, the way the wood had aged, the sophisticated preservation techniques, everything pointed to genuine antiquity. "We need to be systematic about this," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "If this is what it appears to be, it could be historically significant. We should document everything before we open it." Jake agreed, and they spent the next hour photographing the box from every angle, measuring it precisely, and researching everything they could find about 18th century maritime artifacts. Elena's access to university databases proved invaluable, allowing them to compare their find with authenticated period pieces in museum collections. The more they researched, the more convinced they became that they were looking at something genuinely historical. Finally, with the sun setting outside Jake's workshop, they could delay the moment of truth no longer. Using a thin-bladed knife heated with a torch, Jake carefully softened the pitch seal around the box's lid. The preservation technique proved to be remarkably effective. As the seal gave way, they could smell the faint aroma of cedar and something else, something that spoke of deep ocean voyages and distant shores. The lid opened with a soft creak of hinges that hadn't moved in centuries, revealing contents that left both of them speechless. Nestled in a bed of what appeared to be oiled silk was a collection of objects that seemed to belong in a maritime museum rather than the hidden compartment of a 1978 sailboat. Charts hand-drawn on vellum, their coastlines and depth soundings executed with the precision of master cartographers. Navigation instruments crafted from brass and ivory, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of handling, and most remarkably, a leather-bound journal whose pages chronicled a voyage that official history insisted had never taken place. But it was the object at the center of the collection that truly defied explanation, a device unlike anything either Jake or Elena had ever seen, yet clearly intended for maritime use. Roughly the size and shape of a small jewelry box, it was crafted from the same dark wood as the container, but fitted with an intricate mechanism of brass gears, crystal lenses, and what appeared to be a small compass rose. Most mysteriously, it was labeled in faded Spanish script as Caja de Huellas de Agua, literally translated as water-tread box. Elena lifted the device with trembling hands, her scientific mind racing to understand its purpose. The mechanism was incredibly complex, with multiple levels of gears that seemed to be calibrated to track some kind of mathematical progression. The crystal lenses were arranged in a pattern that suggested optical measurement, while the compass rose appeared to be mounted on a gimbal system that would keep it level, regardless of the box's orientation. Jake studied the device with a mechanic's appreciation for precision engineering. "Look at the craftsmanship," he murmured. "Every gear is hand-cut, every joint is perfect. This isn't just a navigation instrument, it's a work of art." Elena opened the leather journal with careful reverence, her high school Spanish allowing her to translate the faded text. What she read made her hands shake even more violently. The journal belonged to Captain Diego Alvarez de la Costa, master of the Spanish galleon Esperanza del Mar, and it chronicled a voyage from Cartagena to Cadiz in the year 1742, a voyage that had supposedly ended in shipwreck with all hands lost, according to every historical record Elena could find. But according to Captain Alvarez's journal, the Esperanza del Mar had not been lost at all. Instead, she had encountered something in the waters off the Florida Keys that had changed everything the crew thought they knew about navigation, about the ocean itself, and about the thin line between science and miracle. The journal's entries grew increasingly excited as Captain Alvarez described his discovery of what he called Las Huellas del Agua, the footprints of water. According to his precise scientific observations, he had learned to read patterns in the ocean that allowed him to predict currents, weather, and even the location of land beyond the horizon with uncanny accuracy. The water-tread box, he wrote, was an instrument of his own design that could measure these water footprints, translating the ocean's hidden language into navigational data of unprecedented precision. Elena read aloud from the journal, her voice growing more amazed with each passage. Captain Alvarez described using his water-tread box to navigate through storms that would have destroyed other ships, to find safe harbor when conventional navigation failed, to read the ocean's intentions like a book written in a language only he understood. The galleon had not only survived her supposedly fatal voyage, but had made the passage from the New World to Spain in record time, arriving weeks ahead of schedule with a cargo that made her crew wealthy beyond imagination. But the most remarkable entries came from the journal's final pages, where Captain Alvarez described his decision to hide the water-tread box and its secrets. He had come to believe that the knowledge was too dangerous for his era, that men would use it for conquest and exploitation rather than understanding. Before his death, he had arranged for the box and his research to be sealed aboard a specially modified vessel, a future Esperanza del Mar that would not sail until the time was right, until the right people found it and understood its true purpose. Jake looked from the journal to the device in Elena's hands, his practical mind struggling to accept what the evidence suggested. "Are you saying this Spanish captain somehow predicted that a boat with the same name would exist 2.5 centuries later, that he arranged for us to find this?" Elena shook her head, equally bewildered. "I'm saying that's what the journal claims. Whether it's true or not," she trailed off, studying the water-tread box more closely. "Jake, look at this mechanism, these gears, this optical system. It's measuring something. But what?" They spent the rest of the evening studying the device, trying to understand its function. Elena's scientific background helped her recognize elements of the design. The crystal lenses were arranged to measure light refraction, the compass rose tracked magnetic variations. The gear system seemed designed to perform complex calculations based on multiple inputs, but the overall purpose remained maddeningly unclear. It was Jake who finally suggested the obvious test. If this thing is supposed to help with navigation, maybe we need to take it on the water. Our maiden voyage is planned for next weekend anyway. Why don't we bring Captain Alvarez's box along and see what happens? Elena's scientific caution warred with her curiosity. Every rational instinct told her they were dealing with an elaborate hoax, or, at best, an interesting historical artifact with no practical value. But something about the Watertight box called to her. Something that went beyond scientific skepticism to touch a deeper understanding of the ocean's mysteries. "We'll document everything," she said finally. "Controlled conditions, careful observations, complete records. If nothing else, we'll have data." The following Saturday dawned clear and calm, perfect conditions for their first real sailing trip aboard the restored Esperanza del Mar. Jake had spent the week checking and double-checking every system on the boat, while Elena had researched weather patterns, tidal charts, and navigation routes for their planned cruise to the dry Tortugas. The Watertight box sat securely in the navigation station, wrapped in oiled cloth just as they'd found it, waiting for its first use in over 2 centuries. Their departure from Key Largo went smoothly, the restored sailboat handling beautifully as they motored out of the harbor and raised sails in the deeper waters of Florida Bay. Elena proved to be a competent crew, her methodical approach to sail handling complementing Jake's intuitive feel for wind and water. For the first few hours, they sailed conventionally, using GPS navigation and electronic chart plotters like any modern cruising sailors. It was Elena who suggested they try the Watertight box, her scientific curiosity finally overcoming her caution. "We're in open water, conditions are perfect, and we have backup navigation. If there's ever going to be a safe time to experiment, this is it," Jake agreed, and Elena carefully unwrapped the device, setting it up on the chart table according to the diagrams in Captain Alvarez's journal. The mechanism proved to be surprisingly intuitive. The crystal lenses aligned with the sun's position, the compass rose, tracked their heading, and the gear system began to move with the boat's motion through the water. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The device registered their movement and direction, but provided no information that their electronic systems didn't already show more accurately. Elena was beginning to think they were wasting their time when Jake noticed something strange about the water around their boat. "Elena, look at the surface pattern," he said, pointing over the side. "See how the water's moving differently here?" Elena looked where Jake indicated and saw what appeared to be subtle variations in the water's texture, as if different currents were creating almost invisible patterns on the surface. As she watched, the Watertight box's gears began to move more rapidly, and the crystal lenses seemed to focus on the same water patterns Jake had noticed. Following the device's indications, Jake adjusted their heading slightly, and immediately they felt the boat's speed increase as they caught a current that hadn't shown up on any of their electronic instruments. Elena checked their GPS and confirmed that they were indeed moving faster than their apparent wind speed should have allowed. Over the next few hours, they began to understand what Captain Alvarez had discovered 3 centuries earlier. The Watertight box didn't just measure their position and direction, it read the subtle patterns in the water itself, translating variations in current, temperature, and surface tension into navigational information of extraordinary precision. By following the device's guidance, they found themselves riding currents and wind patterns that seemed to appear just when they needed them, making progress toward their destination with an efficiency that defied conventional sailing wisdom. Elena documented everything with scientific rigor, taking readings from both the Watertight box and their electronic instruments, photographing the water patterns Jake had learned to recognize, recording their speed and position at regular intervals. The data was undeniable. They were sailing faster and more efficiently than should have been possible under the conditions, guided by information that no modern instrument could provide. As the sun began to set on their first day of sailing with Captain Alvarez's device, they found themselves ahead of schedule and experiencing the kind of perfect sailing that most sailors dream about but rarely achieve. The Esperanza del Mar moved through the water with a grace and efficiency that seemed almost supernatural, guided by patterns in the ocean that had been invisible to them just hours before. But it was on their second day at sea that they truly understood the power of what they'd discovered. A weather system that hadn't appeared on any forecast began building on the horizon, promising the kind of sudden squall that can turn a pleasant cruise into a survival situation. Their electronic weather instruments gave them no warning, but the Watertight box began indicating a course change that would take them away from their planned route. Jake's sailing experience told him to trust the device, even though it seemed to be leading them directly toward the approaching storm. Elena's scientific training demanded skepticism, but the data she'd collected the previous day suggested the Watertight box's guidance had been consistently accurate. Together, they made the decision to follow the device's recommendations, even as the sky darkened and the wind began to build. What happened next validated Captain Alvarez's 3-century-old claims in the most dramatic way possible. Following the Watertight box's guidance, they sailed not into the storm, but around it, riding currents and wind patterns that carried them through calm water while the squall raged less than a mile away. They could see the lightning, hear the thunder, feel the pressure changes of the violent weather, but they remained in a corridor of relatively calm conditions that seemed to exist solely for their passage. Elena watched in amazement as the device guided them through what should have been dangerous waters with the precision of a master navigator who could see patterns invisible to everyone else. The Watertight box didn't just predict the weather. It read the ocean's response to atmospheric changes, translating the water's footprints into navigational guidance that kept them safe when conventional wisdom would have led them into disaster. By the time they reached the dry Tortugas, both Jake and Elena understood that they had discovered something that would change their lives forever. The Watertight box wasn't just a historical curiosity or an elaborate hoax. It was a functioning navigation instrument that provided access to information about the ocean that modern science hadn't even recognized as existing. Their return voyage to Key Largo confirmed what they'd learned on the outbound trip. Following the device's guidance, they completed the passage in record time, sailing through conditions that should have been challenging with an ease that bordered on the miraculous. Elena's carefully documented data showed consistent patterns. When they followed the Watertight box's recommendations, they achieved better speed, more comfortable sailing conditions, and uncanny accuracy in predicting weather changes. Back in Jake's workshop, they spread out Elena's data and Captain Alvarez's journal, trying to understand the full implications of their discovery. The Spanish captain's writings suggested he had spent years developing his understanding of water patterns, learning to read signs in the ocean that most sailors never noticed. The Watertight box was the culmination of that research, a device that could measure and interpret the subtle indicators that revealed the sea's hidden intentions. Elena's scientific mind raced with possibilities. If Captain Alvarez's techniques could be understood and replicated, they could revolutionize everything, from weather prediction to ocean current mapping. Jake's practical experience suggested even more immediate applications: search and rescue operations, commercial shipping efficiency, recreational sailing safety. The device they'd found represented knowledge that could benefit countless people, information that could save lives and advance human understanding of the ocean. But as they studied the journal more carefully, they also understood Captain Alvarez's concerns about sharing such powerful knowledge. The Spanish captain had written extensively about his fears that the techniques would be misused, that governments and military forces would weaponize the ability to predict and navigate weather patterns. His decision to hide the Watertight box had been motivated not by selfishness, but by a deep understanding of human nature and the potential for knowledge to be perverted into tools of exploitation. Jake and Elena faced the same dilemma that had confronted Captain Alvarez 3 centuries earlier. They possessed knowledge that could benefit humanity, but they also understood the potential for that knowledge to be misused by those who prioritized power over wisdom. The decision of what to do with their discovery would require careful thought and perhaps courage equal to that shown by the Spanish captain who had hidden his secrets so well. As they sat in Jake's workshop that evening, surrounded by the evidence of their impossible discovery, both of them understood that their lives had been irrevocably changed. They had set out to restore a broken sailboat and ended up uncovering secrets that challenged everything they thought they knew about the ocean, about navigation, and about the thin line between science and miracle. Elena looked at Jake across the table, seeing in his weathered face the same mixture of excitement and responsibility that she felt in her own heart. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. Jake studied the water-tread box, its brass mechanism gleaming in the workshop's fluorescent lights, and thought about Captain Alvarez's words, about the responsibility that came with knowledge, about the difference between wisdom and mere information. "We learn," he said finally. "We understand what we've been given, and we figure out how to use it wisely. Captain Alvarez trusted us to find this for a reason. Maybe our job isn't to share the secret with the world, but to become the guardians of something precious until the world is ready for it." Elena nodded, understanding that they had become part of a story that began 3 centuries ago and might continue for centuries more. The Esperanza del Mar had brought them together, the restoration project had taught them to work as partners, and now the water-tread box had given them a mission that would define the rest of their lives. In the months that followed, Jake and Elena continued their sailing partnership, but now with a deeper purpose. They used the water-tread box to explore the waters around Florida, gradually developing their own understanding of the techniques Captain Alvarez had pioneered. Elena applied her scientific training to documenting the device's capabilities, while Jake's practical experience helped them refine their ability to read the water patterns that made such precise navigation possible. They began to help other sailors in subtle ways, using their enhanced weather prediction abilities to warn friends about dangerous conditions, their understanding of current patterns to suggest more efficient routes, their growing skill at reading the ocean's intentions to prevent accidents before they happened. They never revealed the source of their knowledge, presenting their insights as hard-won experience rather than the gift of an impossible 18th century instrument. Their partnership deepened into something more than friendship as they shared the weight of their secret and the joy of their discoveries. Two people who had found each other through a shared moment of beautiful foolishness had been transformed by their impossible find into guardians of knowledge that connected them to centuries of maritime wisdom and responsibility. The water-tread box sits now in a place of honor aboard the Esperanza del Mar. Used regularly but never carelessly, its secrets gradually revealing themselves to two people who understand that some knowledge comes with the obligation to use it wisely. Jake Morrison and Elena Vasquez learned that buying a wrecked sailboat could change their lives, but more importantly, they discovered that being chosen as guardians of impossible knowledge was both a privilege and a responsibility that would define their purpose for years to come. Captain Diego Alvarez de la Costa had been right about human nature, but perhaps he had also been right about trust. Sometimes the ocean itself chooses who should be entrusted with its deepest secrets, and sometimes a broken sailboat carries more than just the dreams of restoration. Sometimes it carries the wisdom of centuries, waiting for the right people to find it at exactly the right time. The secret water-tread box that changed Jake and Elena's lives remains their secret still, its techniques gradually being understood and carefully applied by two people who understand that the greatest discoveries often come with the greatest responsibilities. They sail the waters off Florida now as more than recreational sailors or even expert navigators. They sail as inheritors of knowledge that connects them to every sailor who has ever tried to read the ocean's intentions and find safe passage through dangerous waters. In the end, what they discovered in that hidden compartment wasn't just a historical artifact or even a revolutionary navigation tool. They found their purpose, their partnership, and their place in a story much larger than themselves. A story that began with a Spanish captain's wisdom and continues with their own growing understanding of what it means to be truly trusted with the ocean's secrets.